The talking drums were still beating when Tunde walked into the naming ceremony with his mistress on his arm. For one stunned second, even the babies stopped crying. The courtyard had been dressed for blessing. White canopies strained against the afternoon heat. Bowls of honey, salt, water, and kola nut sat on a low table draped in lace. Women in carefully tied head wraps fanned themselves with folded programs. Men shifted in embroidered robes, gold watches glinting beneath sleeves. At the center of it all sat Amara, her body still tender from childbirth, her newborn daughter wrapped against her chest in soft ivory cloth. And then Tunde entered, as if he were arriving at a celebration built for him alone. He wore white. The woman beside him wore gold. Gold that did not belong in this family. Gold that had not been chosen by chance. Gold that matched the coral beads around his mother's neck. A murmur passed through the compound like wind through dry leaves. Amara did not move at first. She only felt the air change. It thickened. It pressed against her skin. The child in her arms stirred at the sound of unfamiliar perfume and jangling bracelets. From where she sat, Amara could see the woman's hand looped through Tunde's elbow, as though she had every right to be there. As though the wife on the chair before the elders was the guest. Tunde did not look ashamed. That was the first wound. He looked pleased, calm, almost proud. His eyes swept the gathering, measuring reactions, enjoying the silence he had created. His mother rose halfway from her seat, then settled again, lips tight with the effort of pretending surprise. Nobody spoke. Not the aunties, not the uncles, not the old women who had come to taste the child's name and bless her future. Even the officiating elder lowered the cup in his hand. Amara's fingers tightened around the baby's blanket. The mistress smiled, small, polished, dangerous. One hand drifted down to the curve of her stomach, where fabric rested too carefully to be ignored. Pregnant. Not rumor, not suspicion, not one more late-night phone call explained away by business and politics and village matters. Pregnant. And here, at her daughter's naming ceremony. The drums died one by one. The courtyard held its breath. Somewhere behind the house, a goat cried out, sharp and strangely human. Tunde finally spoke. "Make room," he said, his voice easy, almost cheerful. "Chioma is family." The words landed like a slap across bare skin. Amara lifted her eyes to him at last, and in that long, still moment, something inside her went perfectly quiet. Not broken. Decided. Before the child tasted honey and salt, before the elders spoke a single blessing over her life, Amara knew this day would name more than a baby. It would name the end of a man who had mistaken her silence for emptiness. Amara Ezenwa Afalabi had spent most of her life being misunderstood by people who thought stillness meant surrender. She was 34, slender in a way that made older women worry she did not eat enough, with clear, dark eyes that seemed to miss nothing, and a face that gave away almost nothing, unless one knew how to read it. She had been raised between Lagos, London, and the fading memory of a river village called Umuade, where her mother had taught her that land was never only land. It was memory, burial, promise, power. A thing that outlived men who shouted. Her father had been a financier who built companies and collected enemies with equal efficiency. Her mother had come from old lineage, one of the women whose family deeds, boundary maps, and inherited claims stretched quietly across coast, forest, and red earth, farther than most villagers understood. When both parents died within 3 years of each other, newspapers wrote about wealth, shares, estates, and succession. What they did not understand was that the largest inheritance had never sat in any bank. It slept in paper, in trusts, in signatures, in land. By the age of 29, Amara was the sole beneficial owner of the Ezenwa Meridian Holdings, tens of thousands of hectares tied to future port routes, rare mineral rights, gas interests, protected waterways, and ancestral settlements. International firms spoke of it in numbers that no longer felt real. $65 billion was the latest valuation placed on the total development rights and associated assets surrounding Umuwade and the neighboring belts. She almost never said the number aloud. People changed when they heard numbers like that. Tunde had met her years earlier, before his arrogance had fully ripened. Back then, he was handsome in a hungry, determined way, a contractor with ambition and rough charm, a village son eager to rise. He liked that Amara listened before she spoke. He called her peaceful. He said she made him feel steady. She liked that he seemed rooted in ordinary life, untouched by the games wealth attracted. She mistook his need for depth. By the time she realized ambition had curdled into entitlement, she was already his wife. They lived well, though not flamboyantly. The house in Lagos was tasteful, not loud. Amara preferred linen to diamonds, books to parties, handwritten notes to public displays. She funded 2 rural clinics anonymously. She paid the school fees of cousins who did not know where the money came from. She answered emails from lawyers in the early hours and signed thick envelopes of documents with the same quiet concentration she brought to folding baby clothes. To Tunde and his family, those envelopes were merely her papers. He never asked enough to understand them. He only learned enough to feel superior. In his village, men spoke with certainty, even when they possessed nothing but borrowed confidence. Tunde had begun enjoying that music. He sat with elders now. He entertained local officials. He used phrases like strategic access and development corridor. He had started believing the village would rise because of him. And through all of it, Amara remained politely present, easily dismissed. Too soft, they thought, too reserved, too educated to survive real pressure. His mother, Mama Bisi, had never fully trusted quiet women. She preferred women whose thoughts could be heard coming from a mile away. "A woman must know how to hold a home," she would say, meaning obedience when spoken by elders and fertility when spoken in private. When Amara miscarried twice in the first 4 years of marriage, pity turned to judgment. When she finally carried a child to term, relief came wrapped in expectation. Then the baby was born a girl, and the temperature in the marriage changed so subtly that only a woman living inside it could feel it at first. By the time their daughter was 2 weeks old, Amara understood that her child had arrived into a house where love would now be measured against inheritance, ego, and a man's obsession with how his name would continue. Still, she had come to Umuwade for the naming ceremony, because dignity sometimes required witnessing things all the way through. She had not yet known how far Tunde intended to go. The betrayal had not begun with Chioma. It had begun with contempt. During the final months of Amara's pregnancy, Tunde stopped speaking to her as though she were his partner, and began addressing her as though she were a delicate inconvenience. He was often away, Village meetings, contract discussions, investor dinners, unexplained calls taken outside under dim porch lights. He returned smelling of cologne that was not his, and impatience that very much was. When Amara asked simple questions, he gave her edited answers. "Boundary survey," he said one evening, loosening his cuffs. "For what?" she asked. "For future development." "Whose development?" He gave a laugh that was almost affectionate, which somehow made it worse. "These things are not kitchen matters, Amara."
She had looked at him then for a long moment, one hand resting over the child turning inside her. Kitchen matters. As though the man speaking had not built his first company using introductions her father's old associates had quietly provided. As though the seed capital had not come from one of her papers. As though the land he was discussing did not, in fact, answer to her signature. She said nothing. Another afternoon, 3 village elders came to the Lagos house. Tunde seated them in the formal sitting room, where cold air from the vents fought the heat outside, and crystal glasses sweated on polished tables. Amara brought out drinks herself because she preferred to move through rooms instead of ruling them from corners. She heard enough as she set the tray down. "Once the deal enters final stage," one elder said, "our sons must not be left behind." Tunde leaned back, smiling with the lazy confidence of a man enjoying borrowed power. "Leave that to me." One elder glanced at Amara as though she were furniture. "Women should not hear too much of money talk." Tunde did not correct him. That silence stayed with her long after the men left. Then there were the smaller cuts. Tunde changing the baby's doctor without consulting her because the village nurse is good enough. Tunde insisting the naming ceremony must take place in Umuade, despite the doctor's advice that Amara needed rest. Tunde ignoring the baby's cries while taking calls outside. Tunde's mother bringing herbal concoctions and warnings. "A man with only daughters is a man people pity," Mama Bisi said one morning, sitting at the edge of the bed as Amara nursed the child. "You are educated. You know life is practical." Amara kept her eyes on her daughter's tiny hand curled against her chest. "She is 14 days old." Mama Bisi's mouth tightened. "And life begins speaking on the first day." The first time Amara heard Chioma's name spoken aloud, it came from a maid who did not know the kitchen door was open. "Madam Chioma called again," the girl whispered to another. "Oga said he would meet her after the site visit." That night, Tunde came home late, carrying expensive sweets he did not remember Amara no longer liked. He kissed the baby's forehead. He did not meet his wife's eyes. "Who is Chioma?" she asked. His face froze for only a second. "An event consultant, for the village programs." "For a naming ceremony?" "For several things." He sounded irritated now, offended by the question rather than the answer. "Must every name become an investigation?" She let the silence sit between them until it forced him to look away. And still he grew bolder. 2 days before they traveled to Umuwade, he brought documents for her to sign. Community facilitation papers, he called them. Permissions. Goodwill support. She read them while he stood over her, impatient. These were not minor papers. Hidden within the language were acknowledgments of access rights and development consents that no sensible title holder would sign casually. Amara placed the pages back on the table. "I won't sign blind documents." Tunde stared. "They are standard." "Then your lawyers can explain them properly." His jaw flexed. "Do you even understand what's at stake here?" "More than you know," she thought. Instead, she said, "Enough not to sign what I have not approved." He snatched the documents up so sharply the table lamp trembled. From that day, courtesy fell away. He stopped pretending to value her judgment. He answered her with clipped phrases. He let his mother speak over her. He took phone calls in front of her without lowering his voice enough. Once, while packing for the trip, Amara found a velvet jewelry box in his overnight bag. Inside lay a slim gold bracelet engraved with a single letter, C. He did not bother denying it. "That is not yours," she said quietly. "No," he replied, "it isn't." He looked almost relieved, as if cruelty had become simpler than concealment. By the time they reached Umuwade, the village was alive with preparation. Goats tethered near cooking fires, children running under strings of rented lights, women stirring pots vast enough to bathe in. The smell of smoke, pepper, and palm oil hung thick in the evening air. Men slapped Tunde's back. Girls giggled when his convoy passed. Mama Bisi moved through the compound like a queen anticipating tribute. Amara stepped out of the vehicle slowly, one hand supporting her healing body, the other holding her child. Nobody rushed to help her. She noticed that, too. That night, through the thin walls of the guest room, she heard laughter from the outer courtyard. A woman's laugh. Low, familiar now from phone calls and whispers. She stood by the window, baby in her arms, and watched Tunde beneath the mango tree, speaking to someone in gold. The moon gave her only enough light to know she had not imagined any of it. Amara closed the curtain gently. Some truths did not need confrontation. They needed timing. By noon the next day, the naming ceremony had become a theater of insult. Amara had dressed in pale blue lace, simple and elegant, because she had been raised to understand that dignity did not need witness to remain intact.
Her daughter slept through the early prayers, lips parting softly each time an elder touched honey to the air and spoke of sweetness. Each time water was lifted to symbolize clarity. Each time salt was named as endurance. Women ululated, cameras flashed. The heat settled low and heavy over the courtyard. Then Tunde arrived late with Chioma, and every hidden fracture cracked in public. She was not merely present, she was placed. A seat was found for her in the front row. Mama Bisi herself adjusted the wrapper beneath her and murmured, loud enough for nearby women to hear, "A home must always prepare for the future." Chioma's hand remained over her belly, a performance so deliberate it felt rehearsed. The elder conducting the rites faltered. "Shall we continue?" Tunde smiled. "Please do." A cousin tried to restart the rhythm by clapping. No one joined him. Then came the moment that took the room from scandal to violation. As the child was about to be presented for the naming blessing, Mama Bisi stepped toward Amara and said, "Give the baby to me." Amara hesitated, then handed her daughter over because elders were watching, and ritual still mattered. But Mama Bisi did not bring the child straight to the officiating elder. She turned and placed Amara's newborn daughter in Chioma's arms. A sound went through the women's section, half gasp, half groan. Chioma looked startled for only an instant, before recovering into a smile that was worse than shock. She cradled the baby awkwardly, possessively, and lowered her face as though she were already practicing motherhood over what did not belong to her. "Beautiful child," she murmured. "She will know her brother." Amara rose. The movement was small, but it changed the air. Her stitches pulled. Pain flashed through her lower body like hot wire. Still, she stood, spine straight, hands empty now, eyes fixed on the woman holding her child. "Give me my daughter," she said. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Tunde stepped in before Chioma could respond. "Amara, don't embarrass yourself." A few men looked down, others leaned forward. Everyone understood by then that the cruelty was no accident. He turned to the gathering and spoke with a calm that belonged to men who believed shame could be outsourced to the women around them. "Let there be no confusion," he said. "This child is my daughter and will be cared for. But Chioma is also part of my future. The family should begin accepting what is coming." His mother nodded grimly, as if endorsing wisdom rather than wickedness. Someone whispered, "He has gone too far." Tunde continued, drunk on his own audacity. "A man must think ahead. Legacy matters." Legacy. In a courtyard, standing on her mother's soil, in front of the child whose breath had only just learned the world. Amara stepped forward and took her daughter back from Chioma's arms. She moved slowly, carefully, the way women do when they know one wrong motion could spill something sacred. The baby whimpered once, then settled against her. Chioma said nothing now. Her smile had vanished. Amara looked at Tunde, then at his mother, then at the elders who had watched this happen. No tears came. That was the part that unsettled them most. She lowered herself back into a seat, reached into the side pocket of the diaper bag at her feet, and drew out her phone. Her thumb moved once across the screen. A single message. "Bring everything. Noon tomorrow. No delays." She slid the phone away, adjusted the blanket over her daughter's head, and faced forward as the ceremony resumed in broken pieces around her. Inside her, the decision had already crossed over. What Tunde had destroyed in public, Amara would answer in daylight, quietly, completely. That night, the compound remained noisy long after darkness swallowed the last of the rented decorations. Men drank in the outer courtyard, women cleaned in tired silence. Somewhere a generator coughed and steadied. Laughter rose, then thinned. Music from a portable speaker drifted through the open windows and faded into the insect-thick dark. Amara stayed in the back room with her daughter and did not ask where her husband was. She did not need to. The child had finally fallen asleep after hours of restless feeding. Moonlight lay in a pale stripe across the floor. The room smelled of breast milk, antiseptic ointment, and the faint smoke that seeped into everything in the village. Amara sat on the edge of the bed and listened to her own breathing until it was level again. Then she stood, crossed to her suitcase, and lifted out a flat leather case she had not opened in years. Inside were copies first, survey maps, title abstracts, trustee letters. Beneath those, wrapped in old muslin, lay the original family seal ring and a bundle of documents tied with dark green ribbon. When she loosened the knot, the paper released the dry scent of cedar and old filing rooms. Her mother's world. Her mother's warning. Never explain power to someone committed to misusing it. Use it properly or not at all. Amara placed the papers on the table one by one. Parcel maps, coastal rights, mineral surveys, existing community occupancy protections, the holding structure, registry confirmations, the latest valuation brief from an international advisory firm, $65 billion across the Greater Corridor and associated rights.
She called Bassie Cole first, the family attorney who had known her since law school and treated wealth as an administrative burden rather than a miracle. He answered on the second ring. "Amara, I'm ready." No dramatics, no questions about whether she was certain. He knew her well enough to hear what had already been decided. "Location?" he asked.
Umuade Village Square. Tunde has scheduled his investor welcome there at noon. Bring the certified copies, the trustees, and the registry confirmation. Also, the protective occupancy documents. Nobody in the village is to be displaced. Understood. And Bassie, she said, looking at her sleeping daughter, I want the marital notices prepared before morning. His pause was brief and respectful. They will be ready. Next, she called the London office, handling Meridian's international negotiations. Then the local surveyor. Then the head of private security assigned quietly to her whenever site assets were involved. She gave short instructions. Her voice never shook. When the calls ended, she took out 2 cream envelopes from her writing folder. Into the first, she placed copies of the title summary, the trustee's authority letter, and a signed notice suspending all unauthorized negotiations concerning Umuwade lands. On the front, she wrote, in steady script, For the Council of Elders. Into the second went a different set of papers, divorce petition, notice of revocation of marital authority over her companies and properties, and a formal directive requiring Tunde to vacate the Lagos residence within 14 days. She sealed it carefully. For Tunde. The sound of footsteps passed outside the room, then receded. Amara removed her wedding ring and laid it beside the envelope. Not dramatically, not with trembling. She simply set it down, as one sets down an object whose purpose has ended. Near dawn, she bathed, dressed in a plain ivory caftan, and fastened her mother's signet ring onto her finger. It was the only jewelry she wore. She wrapped her daughter in fresh muslin and sat by the window while the first light entered the village, thin and gray at first, then gold over corrugated roofs and red earth. Roosters called. Women swept courtyards. Somewhere beyond the houses, the river moved with the old patience of things that outlast humiliation. Tunde came in just after sunrise, smelling of soap and expensive cologne, as though he could wash the day before off his skin. He glanced at her, then at the baby. There's a stakeholder meeting at noon, he said. Big people are coming. Stay out of the way today. Amara adjusted the child's blanket. Of course. He seemed satisfied by that.
That was the tragedy of arrogant men. They heard surrender in any tone softer than challenge. By mid-morning, vehicles began arriving in the village square. Local officials, aides, consultants, men in pressed shirts carrying folders too thin for honest work. Tunde moved among them, laughing, receiving greetings, playing the host of a future he thought he was about to own. From the guest room window, Amara watched dust rise behind 3 black SUVs approaching from the main road. Bassie had arrived. She lifted the first envelope, then the second. Outside, drums began again, this time for a different ceremony. The kind men never recognized until it had already begun. The village square was crowded by noon. Plastic chairs had been arranged beneath new canopies. Banners fluttered between poles, announcing partnership, progress, prosperity. Men wiped sweat from their necks and practiced smiles for photographs not yet taken. Women stood at the edges in curious clusters. News of the naming ceremony insult had spread through Umuwade overnight, and now half the village had come not for business, but for atmosphere. Something was coming. Even those who did not know what could feel it. Tunde stood near the center in charcoal senator wear, speaking with an official from the State Development Office. Chioma was there too, though more discreetly dressed now, standing beneath a canopy beside Mama Bisi. She looked less triumphant in daylight. On the table before them lay the memorandum to be signed. When Amara entered the square with her daughter in her arms, conversations thinned, then stopped.
She did not arrive with noise. That was what made it powerful. She arrived with precision. Bassie walked at her left, carrying a leather portfolio. At her right was a silver-haired trustee from London, careful in the heat, but unmistakably important. Behind them came two registry officers, a surveyor with rolled maps, and security men who knew how to be visible without appearing aggressive. The black SUVs remained parked at the edge of the square, like punctuation. Tunde saw her and frowned. "For what reason is this procession here?" he asked, trying to laugh. Amara reached the table and looked down at the document before him. Then she lifted her eyes. "Before anyone signs," she said, "there is a matter of ownership." The state officials shifted. The elders straightened in their chairs. A murmur moved through the crowd. Tunde's smile thinned. "Amara, this is not the place." "It is exactly the place." Bassie opened the portfolio and removed the first cream envelope. He slid it across the table to the head elder. An envelope moment. Small, silent, final.
The old man frowned as he broke the seal. His eyes moved over the first page, then jerked back to the top. He turned to the registry officer, who stepped forward and nodded. "It is authentic," the officer said. No one spoke. Bassie addressed the gathering in the even tone of a man presenting weather. "The parcels identified in this proposed agreement, including the village square, the surrounding residential settlement, the river access corridor, and the adjoining development belt, are not communal freehold under negotiable village authority. They are held under the Ezenwa Meridian Trust. Sole beneficial owner, Mrs. Amara Ezenwa Afolabi." The square seemed to inhale. Tunde gave a sharp laugh. "That is impossible." The surveyor unrolled the maps across the table. Colored boundaries spread over paper like exposed truth. Registry numbers, deed references, transfer confirmations, coastal overlays, mineral notes. Nothing looked impossible now. Bassie continued. "Current combined assessed value of the broader land rights and associated development interests exceeds $65 billion. This time, the gasp was audible. Chioma stepped back first. Mama Bisi gripped the arm of her chair so hard her knuckles blanched. Tunde stared from the maps to Amara as if looking at a language he should have learned years ago and never bothered to. "You're lying," he said, but already his voice had changed. Amara rested one palm on her daughter's back. The child slept through history. "No," she said softly. "I was simply never loud." He moved toward her. Security shifted once, barely. He stopped. "All this time," he demanded, "you let me—" She saved him from finishing the sentence. "You made your own decisions." The elder with the envelope was now visibly trembling. "Madam Amara," he said, and the title landed differently from anything he had called her before. "Does this mean the village is in danger?" At that, every face turned to her. This was the real power, and she knew it. Not the humiliation of a husband, not the number on a valuation brief. It was the ability to terrify or reassure an entire community with a single sentence. Amara let the silence breathe before she answered. "No one will be displaced," she said. "My family protected occupancy here long before any of us were born. Those protections remain. I have already instructed my lawyers to establish a community trust so the village is secure before any development proceeds." A ripple passed through the crowd. Confusion, relief, shame.
Then she looked at Tunde. "But no man," she said, voice low and perfectly clear, "who could dishonor his wife and newborn child in public will negotiate my mother's land."
Not now. Not ever. The words hit harder because they were not shouted. Tunde's face lost color. "Amara." She placed the second envelope on the table in front of him. "For Tunde." He stared at it. "Inside," she said, "are the papers ending our marriage, revoking your authority over every company and property connected to my name, and requiring you to leave my Lagos residence within 14 days. A sound like collective shock moved through the women behind the chairs. Tunde looked up, desperate now, anger rising because it was all he had left. "You would do this here? In front of everyone?" Her gaze did not waver. "You brought another woman to my daughter's naming ceremony," she said. "I brought the truth to yours." Nobody moved. Nobody rescued him. Not his mother, not Chioma, who was already looking at the ground with the expression of a woman recalculating her future. Not the elders, whose imagined authority had dissolved under stamped paper and real ownership. Not the officials, who understood liability well enough to take 2 polite steps away from the unsigned agreement. The head elder removed his cap slowly. Then, in full view of the square, he stood and bowed his head toward Amara. It was not dramatic. It was worse for Tunde. It was real. And in that blazing, breathless noon, the entire social order of Umuade turned without a single scream. Fallout arrived the way serious consequences often do, not in one explosion, but in clean, irreversible layers. By evening, the proposed agreement had collapsed. The state officials left quietly. The consultants stopped returning Tunde's calls. Word spread beyond Umuade by nightfall and into Lagos by morning. Village son overreaches, wife owns land, deal frozen, marriage ending. In circles where reputation was currency, Tunde had gone bankrupt before the week was over. Chioma disappeared first. No dramatic farewell, no confrontation, just absence. Her number stopped connecting. The boutique she ran in the city closed for renovations. Whatever she had believed she was attaching herself to had dissolved under the simple cruelty of facts. Men with uncertain status make poor investments. Mama Bisi held out longer. Pride can survive humiliation for a few days before reality enters the bones. On the 4th day, she came to Amara's room without escorts, without performance, looking smaller than her voice had ever sounded. "I did not know," she said. Amara was packing baby clothes into neat stacks. "That has never been the real issue." The older woman swallowed. "Tunde made a mistake." Amara folded a muslin blanket. "No, he made a choice. Many of them." There was no sharpness in her tone, which made the words impossible to argue with. Mama Bisi looked at the child sleeping in the cot and began to cry. Not theatrically, not loudly, but with the exhausted grief of a woman forced to witness the ruin of her own teachings. Amara did not comfort her. Some pains are educational. The village elders requested a formal audience before Amara left Umuade. This time they came with careful language and lowered eyes. They apologized for the insult at the naming ceremony, for the assumptions, for speaking around her instead of to her, for forgetting that dignity does not advertise itself. She listened. She accepted the apology on behalf of herself and her daughter. Then she outlined the terms of the new community trust, the legal protections for residents, the revenue model for future development, and the women's cooperative she intended to fund first. That last part shifted the room. The women of the village, who had watched her humiliation in pained silence, began to look at her differently now. Not as the quiet wife who endured, but as a woman who had endured and still chosen justice over vengeance. Tunde, meanwhile, discovered how empty public masculinity sounds when stripped of access. The Lagos house was in her name. The vehicles tied to her companies were reclaimed. His pending political endorsement evaporated. Men who once called him chairman returned to calling him by his first name. He moved into a cousin's guest annex and started wearing dark glasses too often, as though shame might mistake him for someone else. Amara did not monitor his fall. She simply stopped cushioning it. Within a month, the first advisory board meeting for the Umuwade Community Trust was held under her authority. Compensation structures were drafted. A maternal health center was approved in honor of her mother. Scholarships for girls were funded from the early-stage proceeds. The village, which had nearly been signed away by men speaking over her, began to reorganize under policies she had designed years earlier, in patient anticipation of the day she might need to act. And everywhere she went after that, people stood when she entered. Not because she demanded it, because now they understood who had been standing there all along. Several weeks later, just after sunrise, Amara walked alone along the edge of the land that had caused so much revelation. The morning was cool, the sky washed in pale silver before full day. Dew clung to the grass. Beyond the palms, the river moved with the same indifferent grace it had carried for generations. Her daughter rested against her shoulder, half asleep, one tiny fist curled into the fabric of Amara's dress. There was no audience now. No drums, no canopies, no women whispering into wrappers, no men arranging chairs for power they did not own. Only wind, only water, only the small warmth of a child breathing steadily against her neck. Amara stood there for a long time, looking out over the village roofs, the red paths between compounds, the stretch of earth men had tried to bargain with, while never once understanding the woman in front of them. She thought of her mother's hands over old maps. She thought of paper surviving fire, flood, gossip, marriage. She thought of how often the world trained women to apologize for having substance beneath softness. Her daughter stirred. Amara kissed her temple. In the official records, the child now carried the name Adaora, daughter of the people. But in the privacy of her mother's heart, she also carried another inheritance, the lesson that a woman did not need to become cruel to become undeniable. Patience had not made Amara weak. Silence had not made her small. Dignity had not made her blind. It had made her precise. Behind her, the village was waking fully now. Brooms brushing courtyards, cooking fires catching, morning voices rising into the air. Life continuing, as it always does, after truth has done its work. Amara turned back toward home. Not the home she had shared with a man who mistook possession for love, but the deeper one, the one built of memory, law, blood, and self-respect, the one no public insult could take from her. Some women do not answer at the first wound because they are still measuring the cost of mercy. And when they finally speak, they do not always do it with volume. Sometimes they do it with a document, sometimes with a name, sometimes with one calm sentence spoken in daylight, while the whole world listens and realizes too late that the ground beneath its feet has always belonged to her. And the land, quiet as ever, said nothing. It did not need to. It had already recognized its owner.